Here.
Soren Peterson.
Here.
Mike Cunningham.
Here.
Jennifer Eden.
Here.
And David Walker is absent.
Thank you for that. At this time, I'd like to suspend our regular meeting so we can conduct a public hearing. The purpose of the public hearing is to review the proposed 2020-2021 fiscal year township budget. The property tax millage rate proposed to be levied to support the proposed budget will be a subject of this hearing. I didn't forget what I was doing. I'm just waiting for Glenn to be seated so we can get started. All right, go ahead. So this is our budget for 2021 and public hearing. So events that will transpire or have transpired in the last year is that we have 4 scheduled elections for 2020. Usually we have 1 or 2 elections, but due to the presidential primary, different villages and stuff, we're going to conduct 4 elections. So it's a very busy time when you conduct election. There's a lot of work to do, a lot of preparation. So we're going to be quite busy around here this year. Al Poole, one of our trustees, he started out with us on our planning commission, became a township trustee, resigned. Unfortunately, he was part of that big General Motors layoff, and there was nothing available in his field, so he took a position on the other side of the state, so he resigned. And we appointed Kurt Schultz to fill his vacancy. Kurt was one of our distinguished planning commission members, and he applied for the vacancy, and we appointed him to fill. So thank you for stepping up, Kurt. We enjoy having you. Kim Veenstra, who was appointed to the planning commission, had resigned, and we appointed Dan Stickle to fill that vacancy. John Chad was on board of review. He sold his house and moved out, so he had to be replaced, so he resigned from the board of review, and we appointed Don Lavasco to fill his vacancy. Thank you, Don. So what we saw was a slight increase in revenue sharing. That was due to property values, and that was also due to increase in sales, or more sales tax revenue. So we had a slight increase in that. We usually do have a slight increase every year, so it's been good for about the last 5 years. We repaved 1.7 miles of Denton Hill Road, north of White Lake Road, to the Fenton City line. So up there in front of the gravel pit, I don't know if you've had a chance to drive it, but we did a major paving project up there, so now we have a nice smooth road. We also added gravel and ditching on Linden Road, near Lake Shannon up to Dean Road. There was a hill there that required some additional limestone, so that smoothed out, and that's a nice road. We're going to continue on with Linden Road, going up to Bennett Lake Road this year. We added gravel and ditching on Hogan Road, west of Linden Road, out in front of Tyrone Woods, out to the township line with Deerfield. We continued our right-of-way tree cutting program. We receive funds for right-of-way every year. So we use that money to cut trees in the right-of-way that are potential to fall onto the road. This helps us a lot in windstorms with fire runs. When the fire department gets called, because we have a block road, it costs us $1,400 to have that tree removed. So it makes sense to use that money and cut a bunch more trees than just have one in emergency. And that's helped us cut down on our fire run costs. Cider Mill Crossing, they continue their growth. They will be built out this year. They'll have over 500 units in there. They are all connected to the Livingston Regional Sewer System. So that's helping with our fund balances on reserve and replacement for the sewer system. Tyrone Woods, which is our other mobile home park out on Hogan Road, submitted plans for their final phase. They were approved on a site plan years ago, and they're going to add about another 100 units. They are also on the regional sewer system. Some of the things that we did is we worked on our land division process. We were doing it a little bit different than most communities. We brought that in-house to simplify and expedite the process and make it more feasible for our residents that are seeking land divisions. We continue to work on ordinances to improve the quality. A zoning ordinance book, and you've seen ours, it's large and it always needs updating. We're always working on ways to improve processes. I think we could probably allocate a lot more time to it, but we're working on it and it's getting better each year. We purchased this new township hall. We had set out a few years ago. The old township hall was in need of some updating. There were some compliance issues there. So we looked at remodeling, and residents were telling us not to put that money into that hall and start looking and saving to build a new one. Well, we've been saving our money from budget reserves over a few years. This came available. We happen to have enough money to do it, so we purchased this new township hall, and we moved in around Thanksgiving time. Nice thing about it is we paid cash for it. We did not increase the millage rate. There's no special assessment. Like I said, this was budget surplus money, and we paid cash. We also sold the old township hall. We're going to close on that on Monday. We sold it well over the appraised value, about $80,000 over its appraised value. One of the things that we did in the contract is that we have an 18-month option to relocate the old township hall. We have a historical old township hall. It was built in the 1800s. It's on that site. We're trying to figure out how to best move it, where to move it, what to do with it in a future use. One of the key things is, it hasn't had much use for the last 20 years, and there's multiple reasons as to why. But we would like to hear from our residents as what they see the future use for that building. We also updated our 20-year sewer plan. 2020 and last year we saw a decrease, or we'll see a decrease in the loan to the general fund. We have been loaning money from our general fund to make our sewer bond. Last year we actually didn't loan any money. This year hopefully we won't loan any. Let's wait and see. It all depends on how many connections that we get each year. We've had a budget surplus for the last 10 years. That is something that we anticipate every year going forward unless something drastically changes. We always put a lot of diligence into that, and we're very proud of that. Our estimated budget surplus for this year will be $85,000. It could be higher than that. So what do we do with our budget surplus? We allocate it to roads, we allocated it to building fund and revolving fund. Revolving fund is a portion of our general fund that we can put money and we can use it for general fund needs, whether it could be for roads, building, site improvement, technology, whatever it may be. But that's our revolving fund, is kind of our cash on hand, petty cash fund for whatever we need. Next slide. So the budget process. So we need to estimate and review. One of the key things that we do when we budget is that we separate our needs from our wants. We eliminate our wants, because everybody wants everything, including I. And we prioritize on our needs. What needs to be done and what's its priority. And we work off that list. Sometimes the needs can wait till next year, sometimes they can wait 5 years, sometimes they can wait 10 years. It's all about strategic planning for the future. We estimate the expenses for the service. We develop the budget, and we base that budget on our income. And we always underestimate our income, and we overestimate our expenses. So we have a balanced budget, and we also have a surplus at the end of the year. We also review our year-to-date budget versus our actual expenses to see if we're gonna have an increase or a decrease next year for that particular line item. For example, this year we had a large expenses for building a site because we moved and we did some remodeling and we added parking lot space out here. That's not gonna happen next year, so there'll be a decrease in that fund. So challenges, what are we facing coming up for 2020? Revenue sharing is uncertain. New governor, so far we've heard that we might see a slight increase, which is a good thing, and that there might not be any change, but until we have that money in our bank account, it's always uncertain. So we track our 20-year sewer bond repayment plan every year. It's been very good, so it's always a challenge. We don't know what could happen with that as far as, you know, if a pump station goes out, gets hit by lightning or anything like that. So that's always a challenge that we're always faced with. We always continue to review all of our services and our expenses. Another unknown is the Orchard Park Inter-County Drain. It's something that we've been working on for about 3 years now. That will have a cost to the township. And our future needs. You know, we can always plan for future needs, but what we don't know is those unforeseen emergencies that occur. Fortunately, we haven't had many of those. Roads, the Livingston County Road Commission and state funding. New bonds are going to affect Public Act 51 for the future. There's new bonds being taken out for MDOT. Can only be used on the state trunk lines, not local roads. But unfortunately, repayment from that comes out of Public Act 51, which is local road funding. There are some bills that are being introduced to change that. We'll see what happens, so that's definitely a challenge and something that's uncertain. But we know that there's going to be some effect one way or another to it. So our tax millage rate is 0.889, and based on a so based on a $100,000 taxable value, you can see the allocation of where your funds go. You can see that state education, the intermediate school districts, you've got a library assessment. They take up the most, and the one that takes up the least is the township. So about $89 for every 100,000. Next slide, please. This is our annual revenue by source. Revenue sharing is where we get most of our money. It comes from the state. And that we're expect to be pretty flat. Like I said, this is still an estimate. We don't know what our total amount for 2020 is yet. We've estimated low. We did the previous years and we actually got more than we had estimated, so we still are estimated low for this year and for next year. So we'll expect to have a little bit more than that. Next slide. These are our expenses by department. The one that really shows is roads, and that's because we had originally planned to only do half of Denton Hill Road. The county primary pavement preservation program had more money in it this year, so they said, well, why don't we go ahead and do all of Denton Road? So we actually spent a lot more money on Denton Road than we anticipated, so that's why you see that spike. Everything else, as far as expenses are pretty flat. Little spikes, you know, you have payroll increases, insurance increases, cost of living increases, so that's basically what you're seeing there. This is our general fund revenue and expenses. You can see that there's a big increase. Last year, we estimated that we spent $18,800. There's gonna be $57,000 spent on elections. Some of that we get refunded for holding the elections. Building and ground maintenance, it decreased because obviously we have a new building and there's gonna be less maintenance there. The only thing that we will have a tick in is mowing is gonna cost us a little bit more. Everything else is pretty much flat. Next slide, please. These are our restricted fund budgets. Some of those show a deficit, but we use fund balance. Through these are special assessments, and usually when you get them, they get a little heavy and at the front end, and as they go on, rates increase or whatever, so you use the fund balance from the previous years to compensate. Doesn't mean that just because there's a deficit doesn't mean that there's money in that fund. It just means that we use the surplus to pay it. Next slide. There we go. Any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, if there's none, then we'll close the public hearing and we'll reconvene our regular scheduled meeting. Agenda-wise, I have a couple things that I'd like to change on the agenda, actually add. Item number 12 needs to be moved to item number 14. So we can add item number 12, which is a resolution to authorize 2 signees for a real estate transaction. And item number 13 is resignation of trustee Peterson. Does anybody have anything else that they need to add to the agenda? If not, I'll take a motion.
So moved. Support.
It's been motioned and supported to approve the agenda as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion carries. Next is approval of the consent agenda. The regular board meeting minutes from February 18th, 2020, the special meeting minutes from February 20th, 2020, and the clerk's warrants and bills.
So moved. Support.
It's been motioned and supported to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries. Next, communications, the fire service run report.
Move to place on file.
Support.
Been motioned and supported to place the fire service report on file. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Next is public remarks. Does anybody have any public comment, question, concerns? Being that there's none, we'll move on to unfinished business. We have no unfinished business. We're gonna move on to new business, and item number 1 is the request of David Dunville to appeal his fire run charge. Mr. Dunville is present. I'm sure you've all had a chance to review the fire run report. Mr. Dunville, did you have anything that you would like to share with the board regarding the incident?
Yes. First, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Cunningham, and all the Tyrone Township Board to allow me to speak here today to appeal the charge for the incident on January 8th. I'm sure you guys read what happened, but what did happen was I was going on my way to work that morning. What ended up happening was my transmission fluid line got cut by my radiator fan and spewed transmission fluid all over my engine, causing the interior of my car to fill up with smoke and my RPM gauge to go nuts. And from there, I pulled over on the side right north of Center Road exit going southbound on US 23. I got out, shut off the vehicle, and in my experience of being a Boy Scout for 11 years, know what the sound of a fire should sound like. And when I opened my engine, I heard a crackling coming from the engine itself, and henceforth I called 911 for my safety and for the safety of other people driving on US 23 that day. what happened was, the chief of police of the Fenton City Fire Department came, over, and his chief, SUV. I found out, a fire truck on the way. It never arrived because by the time the chief got there, the smoke stopped. It was clear what happened, was a fluid leak that spewed all over my engine of my car. Chief only took about 8 minutes to, figure out what was wrong, get down my information and head on his way. I would like to, ask you guys to, reverse this charge, or at least knowing that, reading your guys' city ordinance on this. Section 5, subsection C, you guys can also, decrease, the amount of the, charge. The reason why I do ask this is I am a 21-year-old college student working part-time, paying for my college all for myself, no help from the state, parents, whatever. It's all from my fund itself, as well as now a car payment, because the car that the incident occurred on, I just recently got, actually 8 days before the incident. I am trying to actually go to school to become a police officer for Livingston County. Sheriff Murphy knows me well. I've known him for about, I want to say right when he got elected as sheriff. He looks forward for me actually working with him, because I love Livingston County. I grew up here in Heartland for the first 18 years of my life. But this charge would financially set me back a little, for the fact that most of my wage that I get from my part-time job goes towards school, as well as my car, and saving up to go to the police academy in Oakland County, which ranges up to $10,000 to attend. With this charge, it will greatly set me back, because it will take money from either saving to go to the police academy, school, which could potentially set back my schooling as well. And just kind of hinder my dream coming to reality sooner. I've always been a public servant to Livingston County, whether it's been Boy Scouts, being a Boy Scout of Livingston County for 11 years. I actually still do help my old troop as an assistant scoutmaster, as well as I do coach Heartland wrestling team. I help coach now and then when I can. I wrestled for Heartland for all 4 years of high school, and I just, honestly, I love giving back to the community, to this county that has given me so much, and have created much opportunity. So again, I do ask you guys to consider reversing or lowering the price. The price was a total of $1,419, I believe. Let me double check that, yeah. And again, I do want to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity today to come to you guys and speak to you personally. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was a well thought out comment time there. We appreciate it. You ever thought of going into politics?
I did. Yeah, it's been brought up.
How many hours of work? How many hours a week do you work?
It ranges, because I work at the Imagine in Heartland. I used to work actually at the Canton one. I moved back, well, now I'm in Fenton, so I don't work in Livingston County, but I moved back in the area due to I did get a little bit of a pay raise. I got a promotion to a supervisor. We call it crew lead, but it's pretty much a supervisor position. But on average, it's between 18 and 30 hours. Very ranges. The movie theater business is very unpredictable with what movies are coming out, what's popular, whatnot. For example, last week I worked 18. This upcoming week I work 30.
Did you say you pay your own rent too?
I do not. I do live with my parents. Fortunately, when I was in Canton, I lived with my aunt for a little and tried to get my own place, but paying rent and school kind of got a little tough there.
And you did say that you're paying your education expenses, right?
Yep.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions for him?
questioning this address being on is this address in the township?
You mean his address?
Yes.
Do you
Looking
live
it
in
up,
Tyrone
I see
Township?
fully,
I've never lived in Tyrone Township. I currently live in Fenton, 3606 Foley Glen
We
Circle.
don't need to tell us your address.
But yeah, there is one thing, I don't know if you have it on there, but on the report that the fire chief written, the number on there is incorrect. That's actually my parents' number. My father is also named David Dunville. I don't know if that matters much to you guys at all.
No. And did you own the car that, was your car that?
Yeah, I own the car. I bought it, actually the 31st of December,
Okay.
so.
Just wanted to verify that. So if anybody has any questions, what do you wanna do?
my mind is spinning right now. But, what I wanna do is just say this is one of those times where we look at somebody who's a value added to the community, doing everything they can. And the unfortunate saying of good things or bad things happen to good people, this is one of them. I know it's one of those shaky things that we very rarely back down from a lot of these things because it's written in the ordinance. Under the circumstances of what happened, you know, sometimes we shouldn't be punished for doing what we think is right. And this is one of those, cost recovery ordinances that is one of those things on a pendulum that, yeah, it's liked but yet disliked so badly. And in the circumstances that somebody had, you know, we're looking at a young kid or a young man doing things on his own. And, I honestly think that, I think we should remove this under the circumstances of what he thought was doing right, but I think we should also see if your insurance company's gonna give a response to as if they're gonna pay it, because,
My apologies for not having this earlier. I did contact my insurance company. They did get back to me. Unfortunately, they won't cover it just because there was no actual fire.
There was no service provided, they won't cover it.
Yep. So we're still billed for the service.
right,
Right.
Is there anybody that has a different opinion than trustee Schultz? Make your motion.
I move to,
You
dismiss the charges to Mr. Dunsmore.
I'll support that.
It's been motioned and supported to remove the charges from Mr. Dunville's fire run. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Aye.
Those opposed? There you go.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, we look forward to seeing you as a local deputy. Maybe you'll be the deputy for Tyrone someday.
Maybe you should call Officer Sanders and maybe you should make him ride with it.
Well, he knows Murph, so I think he has a direct line to him. So.
Right.
All right, thanks for showing up. Good luck to you.
thank you.
Next on the agenda is the Oaks, formerly known as the Sanctuary Conditional Rezoning Application. Kurt, did you want to speak to that, or you want me to take it?
I can do it if you want.
Sure, fine.
We have spent a lot of time over the past 3 months working with Mr. Boss in regards to the sanctuary and the conditional rezoning. We've had a number of presentations. In addition to that, the Planning Commission made the decision to not accept the request of Mr. Boss to rezone to from RF to RE and then use the CDO piece of legislation to rezone the area. we found a number of things that were missing in the process. One of the things is, to use CDO, you need to have 50% of the area of the development that would be dedicated as open space. Now, those requirements, although the developer believes that they're being met, we questioned that as the space that was used as open space in the design included the setbacks in the yards of each of the lots, as well as the space in between the, well, I should say, just around the outside. Plus, it included areas that were part of the retention pond and some of the sewage areas and that kind of thing. The question also was not addressed as to whether there are regulated wetlands in the development. And although an analysis was done, I believe in 2005, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we never did see anything from Eagle in regards to whether there is a regulated wetland in there. The request originally was brought up in 2018 and received conditional approval, but the conditional approval was based on the fact that the development as it was designed was originally on 62 acres, and an additional 10 acres were purchased, and a redesign was submitted. And from the perspective of the Planning Commission, it doesn't meet the requirements of the MZEA, which is the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, under which the CDO provision is part of the, for cluster development, is part of the process. It doesn't meet all the standards there. I don't think that in any circumstance we're against the development as it is. I think that the process should be accepted under the directions that are provided for the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. Now, this also went to the Livingston County Planning Commission, where it was also denied. So at this juncture, unless we're seeing some changes that are going to come through with it, you know, having sat through the Planning Commission process and been involved with this from the start, I question whether there are enough changes in here to support accepting the development proposal as it is today.
Thanks for your synopsis. And one other thing I'd like to add to that too is when we gave them a conditional site plan approval on the first site, from that time when they came back with the second plan, we had changed our zoning ordinance for the minimum lot size from 2 acres to 3 acres, which they now fell under because it was a new site plan.
That's correct.
So, okay. Did you see this document that he just handed out?
No, I haven't looked
We
at
want to take a quick second to look at it while they're getting set up, and then we'll let them address the board. Let me know when you're done looking at it, and we'll.
This was 6 months ago, first one. This is 62 acres. This is about this corner.
Did you get a chance to review those?
Yes.
All right, we'll hear from Dan Boss. Dan, thank you for coming.
Thank you. I am Dan Voss. I am one of the developers here. I have with me tonight my partners, Mark Cook and Dan White. I also have my attorney, Roger Meyer, I have my engineer, Brent Levanway, and my consultant, Steve Morgan. We appreciate your time this evening. Why are we even here this evening asking for a conditional rezoning? Recent votes by your planning commission and Livingston County Planning have put you in an unusual position of having to make a tough decision. Either vote to reject this plan in support of your planning commission, even though every one of you, when you look at it, will say it's a much better plan, or vote to approve this plan because it's the correct decision and it's a great addition to our community. Here's the history. You have two drawings before you that I just passed out. The top page labeled 1 week. It's a 62-acre drawing that was previously approved. It's labeled 1 week because that's how long it took for the Planning Commission to approve it and the Township Board to approve it unanimously, because it was a good plan. Page 2, labeled 6 months, is the plan that we're presenting this evening, and it's labeled 6 months simply because that's how long we've been working with the Planning Commission on getting this approved. Back in 2005 is when we purchased this 72-acre property, and we immediately sold the 72 acres. In 2009, we repurchased 62 of the 72 acres. Prior to submitting our 62-acre development that was approved back in December of 2017, we tried to purchase the additional 10 acres but couldn't come to an agreement on purchasing that property. It was zoned 2 acres at that time. Even though the master plan for the township future use plan contemplates an overall density of 1.5 acres per lot, the developer chose not to go through rezoning because of the time it would take. So the plan, it was zoned for 2 acres back at that point in time. We chose to go with a 2-acre plan. The 62-acre plan was approved. We did not own the 10 acres at that point in time, but it was zoned 2 acres as well. So in December 17th of 2017, we received unanimous approval, and it took a 1-week time frame to do that. And it was zoned for 2 acres. In March of 2018, the township changed their zoning from 2 acres to 3 acres. We didn't think it affected our plan because we had a 62-acre plan that was approved, and we were going with 2-acre lots. We didn't own the 10 acres at that point in time, but we were trying to buy it all along. We continued the development process going through the different government agencies all during 2018, and in 2019 we had the opportunity to purchase the 10 acres back. So the original 72 acres would then be combined, 62 plus the 10, we would now have 72 acres. We approached the township in May of 2019 with a design that showed the new road layout. Now, you have in front of you the small drawings of just exactly what we have up here. This is the 62 acre that was approved, and here's the 72 acre development. Now, in our course of trying to get this approved, we're not looking to have any greater density than we had when we bought the property. I have to qualify that. When we bought it in 2005. Because the township changed the zoning in 2018, it necessitated a different method of going through this process. The logical conclusion was if there's 31 lots on 62 acres, and the property was zoned the same, that if you add 10 acres to it, you can get 5 more lots. So we submitted a plan for 36 lots. We felt it was a good plan, and it was a plan based on a tremendous amount of discussion with the Township Planning Commission and the Township Board members. And there wasn't anyone at that point in time that said there's anything wrong with this. They loved the plan. It's a much better plan because it has a road system that continually goes through instead of a cross system here. Much better for the safety, much better planning. It's exactly what should be done with this property. But we submitted this, and the issue that came up during the course of submittal was, and this is to the Township Planning Commission's credit, they said, well, we love this plan, however, because this 10-acre piece over here is now zoned 3 acres, you can't just submit it as if it's 2 acres. They said, give us a method that we can go ahead and approve this plan. We love the plan, give us a method of approving it. So we talked with our attorney, and he got with the township attorney and said, what's the best way to proceed here? And the answer was, let's do a conditional zoning on the 10 acres. Because that's all we needed to rezone, because we already had the approval for these lots, 31 lots on 62 acres. So we submitted a conditional rezoning on just the 10 acres. Planning Commission said, well, we don't like the conditional rezoning on just the 10 acres because it's actually going to affect the entire property. That makes sense to us. We thought, okay, we'll just now change our plan from a conditional zoning on 10 acres to a conditional zoning on the entire 72 acres. Now, my discussion with my attorney was a little bit different because we didn't want to go through a rezoning. We simply wanted to go with the property as it was intended at the start, 2 acres. However, because the ordinance got changed to 3 acres, we had to go through a conditional rezoning. So my question to my attorney was, if we're going through a conditional rezoning and the master plan calls for it, why would we not go for 41 lots? And the statement to me was, well, if you want to get it approved, you don't go through that process. You just simply do what they asked you to do. That's fine. I'll go ahead and do the conditional zoning to get the 36 lots. He asked me, can you live with 36 lots? I said yes, because I have somebody who was buying the property based on the design that we had because of all of our meetings with the Planning Commission and the township, that everybody is saying, what a great plan, and it is. So we resubmitted the plan for now 72 acres, conditional rezoning on the entire 72 acres. The Planning Commission had an internal meeting and said they wanted to have additional wetland determination. We felt that it was premature, however, we went ahead and did that, got a second wetland determination because our original wetland determination was done back in 2005, but we had another one done. We still feel it's premature for that because the process will ultimately dictate what we do and don't have to do as far as wetlands and any other of the requirements of road commissions, etc. The bottom line is this. Your master plan calls for density as high as 1.5 acres per lot, which would allow 41 lots on this 72 acres. Your master plan calls for that. The proposed density that we're asking for isn't for 41 lots. We're calling for every lot in here to be master planned for 2 acre zoning, and using the open space preservation plan, all of these lots would be 1 acre. So if we have 72 acres, we're now going to have 36 lots. I was shocked when we went to the planning commission meeting and they recommend denial. Think about this. This got approved in 1 week at the planning commission and township board level. Now, I knew we went through a long process here that took us 6 months, but we had everything ironed out, in our opinion, and the way it was conveyed to us. What a great plan. So we're very shocked that they recommend denial. And they did it because they say it didn't comply with the Michigan Enabling Act. It was obvious to us that the Planning Commission did not understand what the Michigan Enabling Act says. And the decision to deny was based illegitimately. When the proposal went to county planning, it was obvious that someone from the township was feeding the county planner incorrect information and omitting important documents for the decision-making process from the county. And our attorney is going to address that momentarily as well. But we have a beautiful plan here. We have a plan that is lined up to have my banker finance it. We've got a builder, Big Sky, who wants to build. I've shown you in your packet there, the last 2 pages, just are a couple of house designs that he sent to me. They're known for building in the hills of Tyrone. My contractor's lined up, and it's all contingent on getting this approved quickly. We really can't afford any more what we consider needless delays, and ask that you make a motion to approve this development, this conditional rezoning today. At this point, I want to turn this over to my attorney, Roger Meyer, and he has some points to make, and after Roger concludes, Brent Landway from Boss Engineering will go ahead and talk about the specifics of the plan so that you understand exactly what we're asking for. Simply an extension of what we had approved before on 10 additional acres. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Roger Myers. I am the attorney representing the applicant here this evening. I am with Myers & Myers located in Howell. I would like to start out my comments this evening by really focusing on, and I think it's really important for the board to understand that what happened procedurally with the Planning Commission and ultimately to the County Planning Department and now here before the board is very important for the board to appreciate and understand in ultimately rendering its decision. And specifically, it's very important to understand that the sole basis on which the Planning Commission made a finding to recommend that this rezoning petition be denied was based on the finding that the proposal allegedly did not comply with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act regarding the necessary amount of open space as designated on the plan. And I would submit to you that that conclusion is erroneous for several reasons. First of all, as Dan mentioned, the current plan is an evolution of what he described as far as the procedure when the initial plan was approved previously by the township. And what's really important to understand is that the application of let me back up, the open space criteria and standards that are included in the township zoning ordinance are the same now as they were back when this initial plan. The standards haven't changed. And the application of the open space to the original plan, and in particular the inclusion of the areas within the rear yard setbacks of the lots as part of the open space calculation, that same standard was carried through exactly in the preparation and the design of the proposed plan. And that's really important to understand and to appreciate, because when this plan was submitted for review and ultimately approved, it was reviewed by McKenna, your township's planning consultant, and the planning consultant that wrote your open space ordinance. And after reviewing the proposed plan for the open space as it was applied to this plan, McKenna approved it and confirmed that this proposed plan and the open space application was consistent with the township's ordinance and consistent with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. That analysis and recommendation went to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission unanimously approved the plan as designed and including the open space application as it was designed on that plan. It then came before the Township Board, and the Township Board unanimously approved this plan with the same open space criteria as designed for that plan. So, given the fact that the current plan that you have before you is an identical incorporation of the same open space standards and utilizing the rear yard setbacks as part of that open space calculation, there's just absolutely, there's no substantiation for the conclusion that the proposed open space as designed in this plan violates the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. I know that Mr. Schultz had indicated that there had been issues raised regarding a question of whether it complied with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. But the reality is that there has been no professional analysis that I'm aware of that reaches that conclusion. And in fact, if the board were to accept that conclusion, that the open space calculation and application of the current plan violates the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, then what you're necessarily concluding is that your zoning ordinance doesn't comply with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, because as McKenna Associates concluded, as the Planning Commission concluded, and this board concluded in the first plan, these open space calculations and application are entirely consistent with your ordinance. And so, to me, that really demonstrates the flaw in the conclusion that there is any violation of the Zoning Enabling Act, and for that to be a basis on which to premise a denial of this proposal. Now, obviously, the question of whether a plan violates a state statute is inherently a legal question. So, when I was contacted to address this issue, I contacted John Harris, the township attorney. I know Mr. Woodmeyer's here this evening from his office, and I specifically posed this issue to Mr. Harris, because if in fact this plan is in violation of a state statute, or this proposal is in violation of a state statute, then there's really nothing to consider. I mean, even if you love this plan, it's invalid as a matter of law. There's nothing, you can't even consider the merits of the plan, because you can't consider the merits of a plan that violates state law. So that's really a fundamental threshold legal issue. You know, my analysis, consistent with the previous conclusions by McKenna, by your planning commission, and by this board, all spoke to the same conclusion, that there was no violation of the state statute. I spoke with Mr. Harris this morning to specifically find out from him, is it the township's position, or as the township attorney, his opinion that this violates the state statute and therefore could not be considered on its merits by this board, and he confirmed that it was not considered to be a violation of the state law. And so I think that very clearly dispels really any consideration that should be given to what was the only basis for the Planning Commission's conclusion recommending a denial, that somehow this plan violated the State Zoning Enabling Act, because it simply is just an inaccurate conclusion. And because that flawed conclusion by the Planning Commission regarding the Zoning Enabling Act was the sole basis for the recommended denial, there really is not any legitimate basis as identified by the Planning Commission on which the board should deny the rezoning application. And this really should be an easy approval for all the reasons that have been outlined by Mr. Boss regarding what the plan entails and the historical manner in which we got here. But unfortunately, it's my understanding that after the Planning Commission meeting, on which the alleged noncompliance with the Zoning Enabling Act was the sole basis for the township's Planning Commission's recommendation, Mr. Meisel, the Planning Commission chair, took it upon himself to prepare an analysis, his own analysis of issues that went beyond just the issue of the alleged noncompliance with the Zoning Enabling Act. And Mr. Meisel's analysis is included in your packet. It's included as an attachment to a cover letter that he sent to the board, I believe it's dated February 26, 2020. I submit Mr. Meisel's personal analysis is problematic and erroneous both procedurally and substantively, and really should not be considered by the board. Procedurally, the document in the last, at the very end of the document states that it's prepared by the Planning Commission and purports, I guess, to be a Planning Commission analysis. But we know that's not accurate because, I mean, the Planning Commission, it speaks through its minutes. It speaks through the public record. And the only minutes that exist with regard to this proposal is the Planning Commission minutes that you have that identifies the alleged noncompliance with the Zoning Enabling Act as the only basis on which the Planning Commission was making the recommendation. There's no, and just to give you an example of other instances in which you've probably seen where sometimes the township planning consultant like McKenna might do a report, may recommend a denial, the Planning Commission just incorporates that denial as part of the basis for their recommendation, and then that gets carried through as the Planning Commission's findings. But we don't even have that here. There was no analysis by McKenna that was incorporated into the approval of the motion by the Planning Commission or incorporated into Mr. Meisel's letter. And there, of course, has not been any subsequent meeting since that December 10 Planning Commission meeting in which those analysis that's in Mr. Meisel's letter were incorporated as the findings of the Planning Commission. So because of that, procedurally, that is not an official finding or report or recommendation by the Planning Commission. As a consequence, it shouldn't have been considered by this board. But even taking it a step further, as I understand it, because Section 29.02C requires a submission of the Planning Commission findings to the county planner, what happened was instead of the minutes and the sole basis for the denial of the alleged noncompliance with the Zoning Enabling Act being submitted to the county planner, Mr. Meisel's personal analysis was submitted to the county planning department. And as you can see in the County Planning Commission report that's included as part of your packet, the County Planning Department essentially adopted verbatim the analysis, the personal analysis that was performed by Mr. Meisel, purporting to be the Planning Commission's findings and recommendations that just simply were not the case. And so, as a consequence, what you have now is you have yet another legal flaw where you have the county planning department accepting a document as the official document and finding of the Planning Commission that procedurally is defective. That wasn't the finding of the Planning Commission, and as a consequence, because the county planner's report is also procedurally based on an improper document and improper analysis, it really should not be given any weight as part of the board's consideration of the application as well. So that really outlines the procedural problem with that document and how it also undermines the credibility of the county planning analysis. Turning to the substance of the document, I would simply submit that in every issue that is in the document that was personally analyzed, Mr. Meisel, with all due respect, and adopted by the county planner, is flawed substantively as well. And I'm not gonna go through this evening and spend the time identifying each and every error in that analysis, but I do want to highlight a couple of inaccuracies that I believe really kind of epitomize the lack of credibility in the whole document. The first item I'd like to point out is there's a section in that document that goes to great length trying to explain how the dimensional standards, the lot widths, and the setbacks and the dimensional standards that were applied in this plan that's being proposed somehow is contrary to the zoning ordinance standards. And I think the most simplistic way of illustrating the flaw in that analysis is to again go back to the original plan. In the original plan, the lots and the dimensional standards that were used for the design of these lots are identical to the dimensional standards that were applied for each and every one of the lots on the proposed plan. Similar to the open space provisions, there's been no change in your ordinance regarding those dimensional standards. The same standards that applied then are the same standards that are applicable now. The same standards that were used as the basis for the design of these lots then are the same standards that are the basis for the design of the lots now. The review of the dimensional standards on the original plan was reviewed and specifically approved by McKenna, who wrote your ordinance regarding the application of those dimensional standards. So there couldn't be any greater authority as far as the validity of and accuracy of the application of those standards to the plan. Consistent with McKenna's review and confirmation of the consistency of that design criteria to the standards in your ordinance, your planning commission unanimously approved this plan, adopting those standards. It came before this board, and like the open space application, this board unanimously approved the application of those dimensional standards to this plan. So here we are now, nothing has changed. It's still the same standards. Your ordinance hasn't changed. The same criteria has been applied, and despite the absence of any analysis by any planning professional or any other legitimate suggestion that somehow these standards do, or what's designed do in fact not comply with your ordinance, unfortunately Mr. Meisel in his analysis came to the conclusion that somehow they are not in compliance with the standards. But with all due respect to him, that's just, it's completely contrary to the history of this project, the application of your ordinance by your professional planner, and the decisions that have already been made by the Planning Commission and this board regarding that previous plan. Similarly, the other item I want to highlight regarding what demonstrates, I think, a flaw that permeates his entire analysis is in the document he goes to great length explaining how the proposal is somehow inconsistent with the township's master plan. And again, the master plan standards that were applicable when this plan was approved are still the same master plan guidelines that are applicable now. And throughout that entire period, these properties were master planned for a density of between 1.5 acres per lot and 3 acres per lot. And Mr. Boss touched upon that a little bit in his presentation, but to give it a little bit more detail to demonstrate the flaw in the analysis suggesting that there's non-compliance with the master plan, when this plan was reviewed and approved, of course, it incorporated an open space reduction in lot size. And as Mr. Boss alluded to, the reduction of open space lot size for this plan still yielded an overall density of 2 acres per unit. You had 31 units, 31 lots over a 62-acre area. So you had a 2 acre per unit overall density, which of course is in between 1.5 acre per lot minimum and 3 acre per lot maximum range that's in your master plan. Under this plan, It's conceptually the same process. You're utilizing the open space function, or open space option to reduce, bless you, to reduce the overall size of the lots, but when you're looking at the density that is permissible under the master plan, again, we're still dealing with a 1.5 acre lot to a 3 acre per lot range, and under this particular plan, we're at 1.75 acres per lot. So yes, while this plan is slightly more dense from an overall acreage standpoint, it still is within the range of permissible density under your master plan at 1.75, being between obviously 1.5 and 3.0. When this plan was reviewed by McKenna, the fact that it was 2 acres per lot, density was not flagged as a problem by McKenna for the approval of this open space option. It was never identified as an issue, obviously, with unanimous approval by the Planning Commission, and it was never identified as a potential problem when it was unanimously approved by the board. The fact that we're now 1.75 versus 2.0, it's the same inescapable conclusion. There still is no non-compliance with the master plan. So I highlight those two issues because, and again, there's other points that have been analyzed in that document. I'm not going to spend time dealing with it because, as I indicated, I don't think procedurally it should be considered, and substantively, it's not an accurate reflection of the application of the township's zoning ordinance and master plan and zoning enabling act provisions to this proposal. The final thing I would like to, to add before I turn it over to Mr. Levanway is there was a comment made by Mr. Schultz at the beginning that one of the concerns that was raised was the lack of a wetland determination by Eagle, what used to be the DEQ, with regard to this particular plan. But I think it's important to take a step back and realize that, I mean, we are at the rezoning stage. This isn't final site plan approval. Even though it's a conditional rezoning, it's still a rezoning. It's still at that stage of the process. The review and determination of a wetland by Eagle, or a review and approval by the road commission regarding curb cuts and access, I mean, those are all final site plan issues. Those are not issues that are typically required at this stage of the process because we don't even have the zoning yet. And so we're trying to get the zoning now. And what I think is important to emphasize is that in the application material, one of the specific conditions that was included by the applicant in the conditional rezoning is that if approved, the final site plan will incorporate and will be required to secure the necessary approvals of all other governmental agencies, whether it's the Road Commission, Drain Commission, Eagle. And so that's a standard requirement, and from a process standpoint, it's something that it never comes at this stage of the game. We're putting the cart before the horse to require final site plan approvals as a condition to considering the rezoning request. And so I just wanted to make that comment because that's still going to be required, but isn't something that should hold up consideration of the rezoning request. And before I turn to Mr. Levanway, consistent with what Mr. Boss indicated, I would ask that the board approve this conditional rezoning request. If there's any trepidation that a board member may have regarding information that was raised in that letter by Mr. Meisel, was never considered as part of either one of these plans by McKenna or the Planning Commission, in lieu of a denial, I would request the opportunity to have the matter tabled so that those issues could get more thoroughly flushed out if the board felt there was some concern about those issues and being a basis for a denial. So I thank you for your time. Turn it over to Mr. Landry.
Treasurer. All right, so from a planning perspective, of course, back in 2017, we were dealing with the 62 acres, and this property, by the way, is of course, immediately south of where the township hall is currently, wasn't in 2017, but is today. So, the property is surrounded by some fairly large parcels. They're zoned consistent with what this property was in 2017. And this property is heavily wooded. It has significant topography to it. It has various wetland pockets. So, we talked about, what makes sense from a planning perspective with this property. Obviously, an option is you utilize the entire property with the standard zoning, and you end up, your road network comes back close to this east boundary and comes back out to Runyon Lake Road. But at the time, it made sense that we go with open space preservation. Again, heavily wooded. If we can preserve larger tracts of the wooded areas, that makes the most sense from a planning perspective. Additionally, recognizing some of the larger parcels around the perimeter, we wanted to be sure that we were accommodating those folks who had shown up in 2017, showed up again in 2019. So we allowed, and based on the open space preservation, we had a very significant buffer here, obviously significant buffer along the east property line, not as big a buffer along the south property line because there's the overhead power lines here. So the parcels here are set significantly further south of the south property line because of the overhead power lines there. So that was the thinking back in 2017. Obviously, that followed through to our 2019 plan, which is this one, incorporating the additional 10 acres. And obviously now the township hall is immediately north of us. But the same principles applied from a planning perspective. We were actually able to even increase this distance here from our developed area to this east property line. This stayed pretty much consistent with what it was in 2017, as did the buffer along Runyon Lake Road, and the south buffer as well, again smaller, as I noted. And we were able to add a significant corridor through the center of the property also, just based on the road and lot layout. So from a planning perspective, we absolutely believe this is the superior plan for the property. Again, the option is you develop it conventionally and utilize the entire 72 acres. That is not what we want to do. We recognize the value of the natural features on this property, and thus we have prepared the plan that you have before you. So I think that really speaks to the reason we're here, the reason we're requesting what we are this evening. And I think with that, the team would be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you. Any questions, anyone? That's a lot of information. I think someone's got questions about something.
There's a lot of information there, and to be honest with you, I would like to digest this problem before I even vote yes or no. Otherwise, the answer is no in my vote. We got 2 weeks for a possible yes, in my opinion. To be honest with you, there's a lot of stuff to swallow here. Even though we have some information in our board packet, we've got valid points here. And I'm not for slam dunking any development. But in the spirits of having a lot of information here and hearing one side of the story here, looking at this, I have my own questions on the definition of open space and whether or not these people that are on the perimeters are even gonna be able to fence their yard if they so wanted to. So, I think the board, unless everybody else besides me is well adjusted to this particular issue, I think we need to research this for another couple of weeks until our next meeting if we're gonna be making, so basically in all essence, tabling and getting more familiarized with this particular problem. This isn't just some little issue here, and just being unbiased saying that. I'm looking for feedback here.
I'm questioning whether parcel 4 and 5 aren't even buildable. If you can even put a home on there, because it appears
We-
that
we
most
brought
of it
that
is
up, too.
wetlands. I'm not sure I would want a house placed on those properties. 13 and 14 as well. They look a little small to me,
I'm all for letting development happen,
right?
but
It has to be.
based on this is a bigger, issue, then I would like to even take a yes vote on, so that would push me to vote no at this moment in time, and I think that's unfair. To be honest with you, my biggest question, unless our attorney can help us out, with defining some things like the open space or the fine lines and the wording of the ordinance for these. Because if we're defining that as open space, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, for what I do know of open space, you can't even put a fence post in. That's just one question I have.
Or a shed,
And
Definitely not a
or a
shed.
playscape.
putting that buffer zone all the way up into the building envelope for a structure, for a dwelling, I think is a concern for people consuming these properties, ignorant to what may be imposed on them due to zoning restrictions. And whether, if it's by all means, if this is a perfectly legal situation, I'm voting yes. That's just how I roll, whether I agree with it or not. If it's agreeable to the ordinance and everything is right, I need to research this more. That's my opinion. And that's just being unbiased on making a choice. Unless the board can help me out of why we should make a decision on this tonight. I know,
We don't have to,
Provided-
we don't have to.
well, I'm just saying this, and, you know, I think we
There's
need
no
to put
guns
some
to our head on
attention
this.
to it. I think we need to put a good attention to this and have have a decision made in 2 weeks. I don't think there's any reason why we can't. And in the spirit of, I know these people wanna move forward, they put a lot of money in it, whether it's throwing good money at bad or not.
Our next meeting until 31st.
So-
We're not, we don't have a meeting.
No, because
Or
of
2 weeks.
elections.
So is the dashed line, is that the building envelope?
That looks, from what I can see of
Brent,
this,
could you,
that looks
could
like the
you
building.
show on the
envelope.
map the building envelopes?
If you see the dotted
Sure.
square,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that is the
so,
building envelope.
right,
That's
so
what
within
I'm-
each unit or lot, there is a dashed line which does represent the building envelope, that's right.
Okay.
So how do you propose to put a home on parcel 4 and 5?
Well, they're within the, 4 and 5.
Yeah,
I
so,
I see a
so,
smidge of land.
right, you gotta keep in perspective the scale of the drawing, so these building areas are actually pretty significant, and they would each have the driveway coming up the side of the lot. Obviously, the lot 4 would be towards Runyon Lake Road, the driveway, the lot 5 would be to the east, and the houses would sit back further, but again, not encroaching obviously on the significant open space buffer to the north and to the adjacent neighbors to the north.
Roughly how many feet is that from there to the property line, Brent?
So let me get this scale out. So the building envelopes themselves for 4 and 5, they're pretty similar. So building 4 is, the building envelope itself is about 90 feet wide by 50 feet deep. And building 5 is about 120 feet wide by about 40 feet deep. And then the distance from for the open space is 150 feet minimum along this north line. Again, obviously significantly greater than the standard zoning setback, rear yard setback.
There was a comment that was made, and see, maybe you can validate it, and I guess your attorney could answer that. You said that the PC Planning Commission conclusions are erroneous because the consultant did not provide an analysis on it. And you were talking about the second phase of that, the second plan. You said the Planning Commission's findings are erroneous because the consultant, McKenna, did not provide an analysis.
Well, what I said was that
That's pretty much exactly what you said. I can find it on the tape.
the,
'Cause I wrote it down when you said it.
the only analysis the only finding that was made by the planning commission was that it did not comply with the zoning enabling act. And what I think I may have said, and if I misspoke, I apologize. There was no analysis by McKenna that the plan violates the ordinance or the zoning enabling act. In fact, there's no analysis by anyone, any professional planner, that the plan and the open space application violates the township ordinance or the zoning enabling act. I think that was my point.
So
is
that makes their analysis erroneous?
Well, it's a legal conclusion. I mean, the question of whether there is non-compliance with, well, let me take a step back. There was no conclusion that the open space application was not in compliance with the township zoning ordinance. That wasn't even a finding by the planning commission. So, and as analyzed by McKenna, this application of the open space does meet the township's zoning ordinance. So the conclusion that the proposed plan violates the zoning enabling act necessarily means that the township planning commission was concluding that your ordinance violates the zoning enabling act. Because if the plan is consistent with your ordinance, and this plan allegedly violates the zoning enabling act, your ordinance violates the zoning enabling act. I don't think that's accurate. I think your ordinance is consistent with the zoning enabling act, this is consistent with the zoning enabling act, and that's frankly just a legal issue. I mean, and that was the point I was trying to make. If your ordinance and this plan don't comply with the zoning enabling act, then you can't even consider the merits of the plan, whether you love the plan. It would have to be denied on a technicality that your ordinance and this plan does not comply with the statute. That's I think it's just an erroneous conclusion, and I confirmed that with Mr. Harris, that his opinion as well is that your ordinance is fully valid and is in full compliance with the zoning enabling act. McKenna's never reached a contrary conclusion. Mr. Harris has never reached a contrary conclusion. No one's reached a contrary conclusion other than the flawed sole basis that the planning commission's decision was based on. That was the point I was trying to make, and if I misspoke during the course of that discussion, I apologize.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you, Dan. When you were speaking, did you say that you had another wetland study done?
Yes,
When was that one?
probably a month ago, maybe a month and a half.
Do you have the
Seen
results?
that?
I don't, I
I
have
don't
the
know.
results.
Yes,
Results.
so we do have the results, and I can provide this to the board. Now, these results are not verified by the state because the state does not perform wetland verifications over the winter months. But it's very consistent with the previous study. The heavy lines on here are the new wetlands, and the dashed line is the previous wetlands. So, you know, some of them got a little bit smaller, some of them got a little bit bigger, but the bottom line is they are consistent with each other, and they're not going to negatively, adversely impact the plan as we've done.
So they're unregulated wetlands as far as this?
Yes,
But they're
again,
not verified by the state.
they are not verified by the state.
When would
and
the state be able
cannot
to,
be.
when would the state be able to
So,
verify?
so that's a seasonal program they run. I think usually it starts up in May. But old or new, again, it's, you know, it's not going to impact the plan itself. We've essentially, we've accounted for the wetlands from the 2005 study. The new information doesn't change that finding.
That's up to the waste and the drain commission to approve that. It's not for us to approve.
Kurt, would you say what you were saying?
One of the things in regards to the wetlands that we had a question on at the planning commission was the fact that one of the roads was going to intersect the one pond there, and whether there was gonna be a problem with that. And I think that was the main question on the regulated wetlands.
To which pond are you referring?
The one on lots 4 and 5, that one goes all the way across and underneath part of the road there. So the concern was whether that was in fact a regulated wetland that you have to deal with.
Yes, and it, again, the 2005 findings, it was unregulated, and the new determination is consistent with the perimeter of that. Thus, we've concluded it's unregulated as well. Then you can do what you do for the plan without the permitting through Eagle.
I guess I would question that being on the planning commission if someone told me that they haven't had one since 2005 and there have been substantial changes in the way the evaluation process works under Eagle. They're simply more diligent than they have been in the past as to what they accept as a regulated or non-regulated wetland. So our question still gets to be on a conditional acceptance of this is whether you've got a wetland there, because that'll substantially impact that plan. If you can't pave over that part of that pond there, that road's gonna have to move.
And I guess if I may, I mean, if ultimately, and as I mentioned, one of the conditions that are applied, that have been proposed as by the applicant, is that it's all subject to approval by Eagle and all other governmental agencies. So to the extent that this plan ultimately, those conditions cannot be satisfied, then if a condition of a conditional rezoning cannot be satisfied, then you don't have the rezoning. Does that make sense? And that's why they do the conditional rezoning, because you build in conditions and it gives the zoning, the township board, the comfort level knowing that I'm gonna give the rezoning, but I'm only gonna give the rezoning based upon certain conditions. And if those conditions aren't met, then the conditional rezoning gets rescinded. It's like, it's so different than one of the criteria is that there's a 2-year window by which the project has to proceed forward. If this sits vacant after an approval for 2 years, then it's rescinded. That's part of the statutory process for the conditional rezoning, and that helps give the board the comfort level of knowing that these conditions are gonna be satisfied before this is actually gonna be developed. And it also gives the developer the comfort level of knowing they don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of money in getting approvals from Eagle and the road commission and everyone else without even knowing if they're gonna have the zoning in place. And so that's the trade-off, and that's why, that's one of the beneficial components of the conditional rezoning process. So.
Yeah, because that decision isn't on the board or on the township's liability at all for conditional, but.
No.
You know, again, I think above and beyond the wetland issue, I think there's some more things to digest. So maybe even throw on a motion to even vote yes on.
Where's everybody else on it? we still have unanswered questions? Do we,
Well, unless somebody here can, I mean, just for one, I don't even have my questions answered, whether or not these people can even fence their yard. You know, because they are separate parcels and that open space encroaches that, and if it's dictated open space, the definition of,
Well, the homeowners association would be the ones who would be stuck with the enforcement of that. And whether they would continue to do that or make sure that people don't put, outbuildings out there or whatever is gonna be up to them. And that's part of where that problem exists, is when you put open space in people's backyards, how do you ensure that in fact that it stays open? You don't.
we got a zoning ordinance that dictated for this open space that's drawn into this plan, this engineered plan, and it's under our zoning ordinance, and we're gonna have the enforcement fall on
The
a
homeowners
homeowners association?
and site
The hell do we have it in the ordinance for then?
we'd still be,
The
It's a site
township
plan.
is on the hook for that
once,
enforcement.
we still enforce the site plan,
So,
regardless of. the
Right,
homeowners
and recognize that
right,
the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act is, we've gotten out of the open space business.
right,
But the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act requires, if you're gonna use a CDO, a cluster development,
Or PUD.
or a PUD, that 50% of the area remain as open space. That's a state rule.
all I'm saying is if it's dictated open space, by definition, you can't, if somebody wants to fence their yard for a dog, they can. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, but that's only on the, we're approving this under state regulations and everything else like that, but then you're gonna throw all the enforcement on the homeowners association?
Unfortunately,
So
That's what you're left with.
and change to another thing. But what happens is the open space applies now.
If I may-
Exactly why I need more
That's how
digestion.
you were able to shrink the lots.
If I may, on that point, so I know the focus has been on, you know, looking at the rear yards, being part of the open space. But that discussion, and that's certainly a valid one, it's equally applicable if the homeowners association decides they wanna build a massive structure out here, it's not in nobody's yard, but it's part of the designated open space, that becomes an enforcement mechanism without question.
Right.
But that's, without wading into how that should get resolved down the road with changes to your ordinances or whatever else, that's an issue that has to be included as part of the master deed and bylaws, and specifically prohibiting what can and cannot be done, whether it's in their backyard or out here.
Right, the question, I could care less about the actual open space parcel or that divided lot line. But on each individual lot, that open space that's for the development encroaches into each and every lot, but not on all of them. Well, actually, on this plan, it does look like it's on all of them. The previous plan did not have it on all of them. And these lots, an open space is, you can't disturb it. So disturbing would be putting a fence post in subdivisions, you know, some people like to have dogs and they fence their yard in or whatever, but again, it all falls back on a zoning issue.
Our zoning administrator's here, you can ask him the question.
Does he wanna be dealing with that? As a zoning administrator once myself, I don't think I'd wanna deal with that, if somebody ever sniffed that out and became a problem.
What was the question?
Those parcels, that open space comes into every parcel up to the building envelope, which doesn't affect the construction of the home or where somebody could put a deck or anything. Let's say they wanna fence their yard.
So the ordinance does not specifically state that a fence may not be erected in an open space area. There are several exceptions to what should be permitted,
Okay.
inclusive of accessory structures that are accessory to agriculture or recreation, subject to an approved site plan. So there's nowhere that specifically prohibits someone from putting up a fence per se. If they wanted to put up a shed to store their lawnmower and their personal
Like-
equipment, that would be prohibited.
I
If
get
they
that.
had some sort of agricultural enterprise or recreational use, then potentially it could be permitted. That being said, we don't require a permit for a fence. We do have standards that have, maximum heights for each yard location for a non-commercial use. They would need to comply with those standards, but there's nothing that specifically prohibits them from.
But define open space. Can you build a fence on a piece of property that in the open space buffer?
You can do certain things on it. You can put a hiking trail out there, you can
If it's recreational.
yeah, make a recreation area out of it. Or
But you can't put boundaries on it.
Right. So it would be
Which is a
tough
fence.
looking out your back window and say, okay, where does my lot end and where does the open space start?
That's all the only reason I raised that issue or something is, could sound as minor as that, only not because I'm trying to destroy the plan. I would love to approve it as much as I can, I'm in the building business myself and I understand what this is going for. But I don't wanna make a decision as a mistake, and I don't want to make it, I wanna make as if everything is right and proper, regardless if I like it or not, if it's right and proper and fitting, my vote will be yes, or my motion will be to approve.
Okay, then
So-
I'll make a motion to table, shall we say to the next meeting, based on the fact that we get, an analysis done by McKenna on the information that we supplied to them as to whether this meets the Zoning Enabling Act or whether it doesn't, and whatever other problems they see with this development as it is, so that we have that information before we vote on it. So that would be my motion.
I will support that.
Well, we have a motion to table
I hate to do it,
under the terms of having McKenna find out if there's any problems with the plan and verify whether it's compliant or non-compliant with the Michigan and Zoning Enabling Act. Is that correct?
And do you want to have the township attorneys look at it too?
but
Yes.
do you wanna add that?
I would add that.
Okay.
I'll
So please
support
say you're amending my
I'm
motion to
amending
include
my
that.
motion to include review by the township attorneys.
I will re-support if I gotta remove it and re-support it, that's what I'm doing.
All right, so everything that we just said to include the attorneys, do you have that, Terry? Thank you. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I would like to, Mr. Boss and your team, I hope you understand, I know tabling could be costly and everything like that, I know you wanna move forward. And I just think this is the best thing, other than having a couple of no votes shoot you down for not good valid reasons. So, I just wanna throw that out there, that's it.
All right, any other comments? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, we'll bring it up at our next meeting, and that'll be the end of the month. Thank you, gentlemen, for showing up and your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your consideration.
Next on the agenda is the Headley operating millage. So every year we have to pass a resolution for our operating millage. It's not to exceed 0.9 doesn't mean that that's what our millage rate's gonna be, or that's what it is, not to exceed.
This is every year, correct? We did-
Every
it's
year,
single
this
year,
is
and
a
it's the same
resolution we
wording,
have,
it's
the same,
everything.
yep.
So moved, or wait a minute.
So
resolved.
Resolved.
Support.
Been resolved and supported to approve the Headley operating tax millage rate resolution. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Jennifer Eden?
Yes.
Mike Cunningham?
Yes.
Kurt Schultz?
Yes.
Soren Peterson?
Yes.
Chuck Schultz?
Yes.
And I say yes.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is item number 4. It's the resolution to adopt the 2021 budget by departments.
So resolved.
Support.
It's been resolved and supported to adopt the 2021 budget by department totals. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Soren Peterson?
Yes.
Chuck Schultz?
Yes.
Mike Cunningham?
Yes.
Jennifer Eden?
Yes.
Kurt Schultz?
Yes.
And I say yes.
Next on the agenda is item number 5. It's request to opt in or out of Senate Bill number 7, health insurance provision for the 2021 fiscal year. A few years back, the state legislator mandated that we make our employees pay a certain percentage of their health care costs. We can not do that by resolving to opt out, or we can opt in. We have opted out every year. And part of the reason is we pay the medical insurance. We do not offer any retirement benefits or 401k. And something that we've always done, so
So resolved.
to opt out.
To adopt the opt-in or opt-out for 20.
Okay, we have to either opt in or opt out.
Oh,
We-
to opt out,
and
I'm
we-
sorry.
We've opted out.
Sorry, I'm reading off the,
Right. So it's been resolved and supported to opt out of Senate Bill number 7. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Kurt Schultz?
yes.
Soren Peterson?
Yes.
Chuck Schultz?
Yes.
Mike Cunningham?
Yes.
Jennifer Eden?
Yes.
And I say yes.
My pen just got there. Papers go here, okay. Next is resolution to establish the 2020-21 supervisor's salary. The amount is $45,620.
Is that out or opt-in on that one? Resolve where we accept the salary.
Support.
It's been resolved and supported to establish or accept the supervisor's salary for 2021 fiscal year at $45,620. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Chuck Schultz?
Yes.
Soren Peterson?
Yes.
Kurt Schultz?
Yes.
Jennifer Eden?
Yes.
Mike Cunningham?
Sure.
And I say yes.
Thank you. Next is resolution to establish the clerk's salary for the 2021 fiscal year, and that is $45,620 as well.
Resolved.
It's been resolved and supported to approve the clerk's salary for 2020 for $45,620. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Jennifer Eden?
Yes.
Kurt Schultz?
Yes.
Mike Cunningham?
Yes.
Chuck Schultz?
Yes.
Soren Peterson?
Yes.
And I say yes.
Guess who's next? This is resolution to establish the treasurer's salary for 2021 fiscal year, $45,620.
So resolved.
Support.
Support.
Been resolved and supported to approve the salaries, the treasurer's salary. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote on that too, please?
Chuck Schultz,
Yes.
Soren Peterson,
Yes.
Kurt Schultz,
Yes.
Jennifer Eden,
Yes.
Mike Cunningham,
Yes.
and I say yes.
Item number 10 is the general appropriations measure resolution. This is something that we have to do every
Oops.
year. Where am I?
Trustees.
Oh, God, I got ahead of myself. I'm sorry. Item number 9 is a resolution to establish the 2021 trustees' salary, and that's $205.82 per meeting.
So resolved.
Discussion.
Do you want discussion before or after it's resolved?
Well, we can discuss after, do we have a support? You supported it, right?
I
She
made-
resolved it.
I resolved it.
We had a motion. Do we have a second?
I second
It's
it.
been resolved and seconded. Go ahead, Soren.
Discussion, yes. I feel this part about having to be present is a little bit like overkill in as much as you're a full-time trustee, not just a time can you come here for a meeting. If you go outside of the place here, you're gonna find people do ask you about the township and everything else. So that's why I contend that you should be able to be paid every time. And then again, when you have meetings that are stopped or not held, there's that much less paid. But go ahead.
Yeah, that was a policy that was adopted, so I understand what you're saying, but this is for the resolution for their salary for the year, or their stipend for each meeting. So, all right, it's been resolved and supported. Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Chuck Schultz,
Yes.
Soren Peterson,
No.
It's the same.
Kurt Schultz,
Yes.
Jennifer Eden,
Yes.
Mike Cunningham,
Yes.
and I say yes.
Item number 10 is the general appropriation measure. This is something that we have to do every year to validate our budget, and it's part of the Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act.
Resolve that we comply with the Michigan Public Act 621 of 1978.
Support.
It's been motioned and supported. Well, could you amend that to say that we are going to adopt the appropriation measure resolution?
I will do so. I resolve to adopt the appropriations measure.
Thank you.
And support.
It's been resolved and supported to adopt the general appropriations measure resolution. Any further discussion? All in favor signify. Madam Clerk, roll call vote. It's getting late.
Mike
Okay.
Cunningham,
Yes.
Jennifer Eden,
Yes.
Kurt Schultz,
Yes.
Soren Peterson,
Yes.
Chuck Schultz,
Yes.
and I say yes.
Next is item number 11, that's request to write off uncollectible fire services account, so we only have 3. One is absolutely uncollectible, and the 2 are due to bankruptcy, which by law we cannot collect on. The amount is $4,196.
So moved.
Support.
It's been motioned and supported to write off the uncollectible fire run service accounts. Any further discussion?
We did take all efforts to collect and
Yeah,
everything.
they went to collection agency and everything.
Just saying that, I'm sure we did.
Yep. Any other questions or comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the motion carries. Next is item number 12. It is a resolution to authorize 2 signees for the real estate transaction. The signees will be myself and Jennifer. Traditionally, we do have the clerk sign, but there is an election that's coming up on Tuesday, and for her to take time off and run down and spend a couple hours to do this, just kind of gets in her way, so we figured that we'll just have Jennifer do it this time. And this is to sell the, close on the old township hall. So,
So resolved.
Support.
it's been resolved and supported to authorize 2 signees, Jennifer and myself, for the real estate transaction next week. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Kurt Schultz,
Yes.
Jennifer Eden,
Yes.
Mike Cunningham,
Yes.
Soren Peterson,
Yes.
Chuck Schultz.
Before I say yes, it is for an offer that has already been accepted and nothing to be changing from the accepted offer, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, yes.
And I say yes.
Next is item number 13. It's the resignation of trustee Zoran Peterson. Zoran is gonna be leaving our great state, and we wish you the best.
Thank you.
And thank you for serving our community and being on our board. We'll miss seeing you around. I hope everything is prosperous for you in your new endeavors and your relocation. The board has to accept his resignation, which will be the 20th of this month. I think we should just go ahead and do that as a resolution.
So resolved to accept, unfortunately, the resignation of Soren Peterson. Effective the 20th.
It's been resolved and supported to unfortunately accept the resignation of trustee Zoran Peterson. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Mike Cunningham,
Yes.
Jennifer Eden,
Yes.
Kurt Schultz,
Yes.
Chuck Schultz,
Yes.
Soren Peterson, I don't know if it matters, and I say yes.
So with that being said, from the 20th, we have 30 days to fill his vacancy by an appointment, or we will have to hold a special election, which means there would be 5 elections, and I think the clerk might not be too excited about that. So, what we will do is we will go ahead and we will list that in the Tri-County Times. We'll do a posting on our website, and I'll see if I can get the editor to put something in the Times stating that Zoran is leaving the state. And
You might be able to
We're
put
look-
it in the Livingston Daily, because there's a gentleman that's going to be calling you.
yeah, he already called me. We're playing phone tag, so
Okay.
I'll
So
definitely
maybe
get it in that too.
but, yeah.
So, what we'll do is we'll probably hold that open for about 2 weeks, and we'll take applicants. And we'll hold interviews, and we'll appoint somebody. And hopefully that person that we appoint would like to.
Is that 30 days from today?
It's 30 days from the
30 days
date of the
from date,
resignation.
right. Okay, good, because that means if we're not having a meeting for 30 days, or 31, right?
Yeah, until 31st.
Yep. Thank you, Soren.
Thank you.
Item number 14 is a resolution to go into closed session to discuss a confidential attorney-client letter. So I'll go ahead and I'll make the motion to go into closed session to discuss the confidential
I'll support.
attorney.
It's
Letter.
it's a resolution.
I did say motion as a resolution.
I'll support.
Madam Clerk, may I have roll call vote, please?
Kurt Schultz,
Yes.
Jennifer Eaton,
Yes.
Mike Cunningham,
Yes.
Soren Peterson,
Yes.
Chuck Schultz,
Yes.
and I say yes.
We'll go over into our conference room over here. Let's meet in 5 minutes, give everybody a chance to go freshen up. You've been sitting here for a while.
Probably stop.
Then you can get a drink of water or whatever. Make it 7.